On the 45th floor of a luxurious skyscraper, a black janitor quietly cleaned the halls late at night. But the calm didn't last long. A manager humiliated her, pouring an entire glass of water over her head in front of everyone. Days later, another executive slapped her across the face in a conference room. No one spoke up. Not a single person defended her. What they didn't know was that the woman they looked down on was actually the daughter of the company's founder, a young CEO, about to make them regret everything they'd done. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so we can meet again tomorrow with another unforgettable story. The scent of disinfectant clung to the polished marble floors of the 45th executive level at Sterling Horizon Tower. It was just past 10:00 p.m., and the city of Chicago glittered through the towering windows like a constellation brought down to earth. The office was silent, saved for the low hum of distant servers and the occasional creak of shifting ventilation ducts. This floor, immaculate and bathed in soft, recessed lighting, was the domain of senior executives and VPs, people who made million-dollar decisions before noon and flew out by sunset for panels in San Francisco or conferences in London. But tonight, beneath the veneer of power and precision, walked a woman no one would recognize. Her name tag read Nia Walker, a black girl. Her uniform was a plain gray jumpsuit issued by Crest Clean Services. Her hands were bare, her curls tucked beneath a simple cap. To the world, she was invisible. But beneath that disguise stood Imani Carter, 29 years old, Ivy League, educated recipient of Forbes 30 Under 30, and daughter of Benjamin Carter, the very founder of Sterling Horizon Technologies. She was the company's youngest ever vice president of innovation, a brilliant strategist who had once closed $1 billion green tech partnership in Tokyo with nothing more than a keynote and a whiteboard. But none of that mattered here. Not tonight. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of the mop as she moved it rhythmically across the floor of the main corridor just outside the C-White meeting room. Her body arced in places she never knew could ache. Shoulders burning from the constant, sweeping motion, lower back sore from stooping over corners no executive would ever think to check. She'd spent the last 3 hours wiping down elevators, scrubbing restrooms, and emptying trash, bins that overflowed with remnants of catered lunches and discarded printouts. Every movement was watched by no one. Every task she completed was silently, absorbed into the background of an empire she was supposed to one day run. She paused to wring out the mop when she heard the measured, precise footsteps echoing on tile, expensive shoes by the sound of them. She knew that sound now. It was the kind of stride that came with authority earned or demanded. She didn't look up right away, but she didn't need to. The scent of cologne hit first, sandalwood and something sharper, and then came the voice. Still working on this hallway, the tone was low, clipped, and laced with annoyance. She looked up, slowly, to meet the icy blue eyes of Colin Graves, the 7-year-old operations floor supervisor. His salt and pepper hair was gelled into place, his shirt starched to perfection. The Sterling Horizon badge clipped to his belt like a sheriff's star. He was the kind of man who prided himself on running a tight ship, which in practice meant holding his subordinates to impossible standards while deflecting any accountability from himself. He didn't recognize the woman before him. Of course not. Not without the heels, the designer glasses, the tailored suits that usually made people listen when she spoke. Tonight, she was just another night cleaner, unimportant, interchangeable, unseen. I just "Finish this section," she said quietly, trying to maintain the tone. She'd practiced submissive, efficient, non-threatening. Colin raised an eyebrow and stepped forward, inspecting the floor with exaggerated scrutiny. "Looks streaky to me. You used the wrong solution," he said, not even looking at her. His gaze roamed over the floor, then down to the cleaning cart, then finally to her with a sneer. "You people never learn." There it was. That phrase, "you people," it slid off his tongue so easily, so thoughtlessly, it might as well have been part of his daily vocabulary. Imani swallowed, the response that burned in her throat. She had to stay in character. "I'll redo it, sir," she said, gripping the mop. Tighter. Colin leaned in closer, his voice dropping just enough to make the moment feel more intimate and more threatening. "No, I think you need a real reason to do it properly." This time, he reached for a full cup of water that had been sitting on a console, table, condensation still clinging to the sides. Imani's eyes tracked the motion with growing alarm, but her body didn't move. With calculated deliberateness, Colin raised the cup and poured the entire contents over her head. The water was ice cold. It soaked through her cap, her curls, her collar. It trickled down her neck, soaking the front of her shirt and spreading into her waistband. The shock of the temperature stole her breath for a second, but it wasn't the cold that hit the hardest. It was the cruelty, the deliberate, premeditated humiliation. The way he looked at her like she was dirt, like she didn't matter. "There," Colin said casually, setting the empty cup on the floor beside her. "Now you've got something real to clean up." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking confidently across the tile, leaving a trail of wet footprints over the floor. She had just finished mopping. Imani stood, frozen water dripping from her, face from her uniform forming a puddle at her feet. For a moment, all the breath left her body. Her jaw trembled, not from the cold, but from the fury she had to swallow whole. In that instant, Imani Carter ceased to be the undercover cleaner named Nia Walker. In her mind, she was once again the daughter of Benjamin Carter, heir to a legacy built on integrity and vision. And she had just been treated like something less than human. But she didn't scream. She didn't break cover. Instead, she bent down, slowly, picked up the mop, and began again. Because this wasn't the moment for revenge. Not yet. This was the beginning of something far bigger, and Colin Graves had no idea what kind of storm he had just invited. The Carter residence sat on a quiet ridge in Hyde Park, just far enough from the Chicago skyline to watch it shimmer from a comfortable distance, but close enough to feel its pulse. Floor-to ceiling, windows wrapped around the modernist, home like a crystal shell, reflecting back the lights of a city. Benjamin Carter had once walked on foot as a security guard outside the Federal Reserve Bank. Now 62, silver-haired and statuesque in presence. Even from his seat at the dining table, Benjamin was no longer the man who paced night shifts, gripping a flashlight and coffee in one hand and dreams in the other. He was the founder of Sterling Horizon Technologies, a fintech titan respected for building his empire not on privilege or venture capital, but on grit, vision, and a kind of relentless integrity that couldn't be bought or borrowed. But tonight, he looked tired. Imani Carter sat across from her father in silence as the rhythmic click of silverware filled the room. The dinner was quiet, intimate, a private ritual reserved for the rare nights their schedules aligned. But tonight wasn't one of those nights. It was a night marked by something heavier. The hospital bracelet, still on Benjamin's wrist, was the only thing out, of place in a home that otherwise radiated intention and precision. Just 2 days prior, he had collapsed in his office. The stress and years of 80 fined, our weeks finally cashing in. The doctors had been unequivocal. He needed to step back immediately, permanently. Imani pushed her roasted vegetables around the plate, appetite dulled by more than exhaustion. The events of the previous night, the mop, the water. Colin Graves' sneer still clung to her like a second skin, but she hadn't told her father. Not yet. Benjamin broke the silence. First, you've been quiet all evening, he said, voice deep and textured, every syllable wrapped in wisdom and worry. Something happened at work. Imani looked up, debating how much to share. Nothing worth spoiling dinner. She replied with a half smile, the kind she had perfected over years of executive diplomacy. Benjamin leaned back, exhaling slowly. Then let me spoil it instead. His tone was soft, but what followed was sharp in its clarity. I've been thinking, Imani, about the company, about you, about what happens next. He paused, folding his hands on the table. I'm proud of everything you've done. No, one could have asked for a better successor. You've got the education, the strategy, the vision. But he hesitated. I worry about what you don't know. Imani's fork clinked softly against her plate. She raised an eyebrow. What don't I know, Dad? I've been part of the executive team since I was 26. I've led acquisitions, negotiated international deals. Benjamin held up a hand, not to silence her, but to slow her down. You know the boardroom. You know the top floor. But I'm not sure you know what it's like at the bottom, where I started, where this company still lives and breathes every night after the "so eat" goes home. The words landed heavier than she expected. When I started this business, I wasn't a CEO. I was the janitor, the receptionist, the guy who made copies and took out the trash. I knew every inch of it, not just the product, but the people. I knew what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated. That perspective is what kept me grounded, what shaped our values, dignity, innovation, respect. But lately, I've been hearing things, little whispers, disconnects, people saying, this company doesn't feel like it used to. Imani's posture straightened. She'd heard the whisperers, 2 casual complaints in hallway, conversations, passive-aggressive emails, between departments, unsmiling janitors, avoiding eye contact on the elevator, but she'd chalk them up to stress, growth, pains, the usual noise that came with scale. Benjamin continued, reports don't tell you how people are treated. When no one's watching, titles don't show you how respect is earned or denied on the graveyard shift, and no one tells the truth to the boss's daughter. Not really. He reached for his glass of water, sipped, then fixed her with a gaze she hadn't seen in years. Not the father, not the CEO, but the man who once built a company from nothing, Diz, in the face of everything. You want to run this company, Imani? He asked. She met, his gaze firm. Yes, of course I do. Then see it for what it is, not just what you hope it to be. Silence wrapped around the table again, but this time it was filled with a spark, a challenge, a charge. Imani leaned in. What are you suggesting? And that was when the idea was born. Not from vanity or vengeance, not from an executive retreat or a consultant's roadmap, but from a dinner table between a father who had built something sacred and a daughter who would soon inherit it. Together, they mapped out the plan. Imani would disappear from the executive roster for 3 weeks, citing a personal development. sabbatical. In her place, Nia Walker would quietly appear on the overnight cleaning roster hired through a third-party vendor that serviced Sterling Horizon's corporate contracts. Her paperwork would be flawless, her history manufactured. No one in HR or operations would know the truth, not even security. It would be a clean insertion, anonymous, invisible. She would walk the halls her father had once mopped. She would feel what it meant to be unseen, and she would learn not from reports, but from reality. Before they rose from the table, Benjamin placed a hand over hers. His skin weathered, warm. "This experience will humble you," he said. "But more than that, it will sharpen you. Don't just observe. Feel it. Let it bruise. Let it teach." And as Imani looked out at the distant skyline, the lights of Sterling Horizon Tower blinking through the night, she knew the path ahead would be darker than anything she'd known. But in that darkness, she would find truth. And from that truth, she would rebuild everything, starting from the bottom. The industrial mop bucket sloshed against the tile as Imani, now Neo, Walker to everyone around her, pushed it down the narrow hallway, connecting the executive restrooms to the East Wing, conference suites. The silence of the building after 10 p.m. was suffocating in a way she hadn't expected. During the day, Sterling Horizon was a hurricane of emails, keycard beeps, elevator chimes, and high-stakes chatter about capital raises and quarterly targets. At night, the heartbeat slowed. The storm cleared, but in its place wasn't peace. It was eraser. On her second official shift, as part of the night cleaning crew, Imani had learned quickly how invisible she had become. Executives who remained late to finish presentations or make overseas calls barely acknowledged her presence. Some bumped into her cleaning cart without apology. Others held loud conversations on speakerphone, walking past her as if she were part of the walls, just another fixture in the corporate architecture that didn't require human recognition. One man, a finance VP she'd negotiated bonuses with just 3 months prior, looked her dead in the eye as she emptied his trash and didn't blink. He didn't recognize her, not because her face had changed, but because people like her weren't supposed to be seen. Her fingers, once manicured and soft, now bore the beginnings of red welts and raw lines. Her back ached from bending over baseboards. The tips of her toes screamed inside the 2 narrow shoes Crest Clean had issued. The uniform itched. The cap tugged at her edges. Everything about this job was engineered to remind her that comfort was a luxury bought by title, not by worth. "Slow down on that polish," a voice called from the hallway corner, low and raspy with years of wear, but laced with a rhythm of wisdom. "You're going to blow your shoulders out by the end of the week." Imani turned to see Louise Jackson, a woman of about 58 with mocha, brown skin, graying braids pinned under, a scarf and arms that had clearly lifted, more than just mops in her lifetime. She was wiping down the base of a vending machine, like it owed her rent, moving with a precision and ease that only experience could teach. "Sorry," Imani murmured, stepping back from the wall. She'd been vigorously scrubbing. Louise gave a dry chuckle and stood up, brushing her knees. "New girl, huh? Let me guess. First week, and already wondering what kind of mess you walked into." Imani forced a polite smile. "Something like that." Louise narrowed her eyes, not unkindly, but with the discernment of someone who had learned long ago how to read people beyond their uniforms. "Name's Louise. Been on this crew since '07. Before that, I cleaned schools, hospitals, even the Bears. Stadium for a minute. You stick around long enough, you learn not just how to clean, but how to disappear. Imani introduced herself as Nia, just Nia. No, last name, offered. Louise didn't press. They worked together for the next hour, cleaning stairwells and office kitchens. The kind of spaces no executive thought twice about. But that took the longest, to scrub. As they moved, Louise offered quiet instructions on how to conserve energy, which supplies work best on what? Stains, and most importantly, how to avoid becoming a target. You watch out for Colin, she said, suddenly voice, lowering as if the walls themselves might carry sound. He gets off on breaking people down, especially new ones, especially ones that don't flinch. When he raises his voice, Imani felt a flicker of heat rise in her chest, but masked it with a nod. Yeah, I think I already met that side of him. Louise shot her a sharp look. He pour water on? You yet? The question struck like a slap. Too specific, too casual. Imani's heart skipped. He does that? She asked, carefully. Louise's lips pressed into a tight line. Not often. Just when he thinks you need humbling. Last girl quit, the night after it happened, but no one, upstairs, cared. To them, we're just cleaners. Replaceable. That word hung in, the air like mildew. Replaceable. As the night wore on, Imani began to see the company differently. Not from the high glass boardroom where culture was a bullet point on a slide deck, but from the spaces in between the copy rooms, the restroom stalls, the break areas, where the residue of overwork and underappreciation clung like dust. There was no eye contact, no names, just the term. Cleaning lady tossed around like a utility function. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a presence, a quiet, expected, forgotten one. In the early hours of the morning, as they gathered their carts to check out, Louise gave her one final piece of advice. Keep your head down, but don't lose sight of what's above you, she said, tapping the side of her temple. And whatever you're here for, whatever brought you into this mess, just remember they'll never change unless someone makes them look. Really, look. Imani nodded slowly, the words carving themselves deep into her mind. She climbed into the supply elevator, her muscles sore, her pride aching, her perspective fractured. And that night, for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be part of a company without being in it, to contribute without recognition, to exist without name. And as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her off from the executive world above, she whispered quietly to herself, not in defeat, but in resolve. They're going to see every single one of them. By the start of her fourth night, Imani's body had begun to adapt to the rhythm of labor, an ache no longer foreign, but familiar, a dull chorus of muscles waking with complaint and settling into obedience. Kalan, the physical toll of cleaning, of scrubbing, hauling and polishing, was no longer the greatest burden she carried. That distinction now belonged to the silent weight of being diminished, not by violence or volume, but by the insidious erosion of dignity, delivered with a smile. It was a lesson she was about to learn more intimately than she had ever imagined at the hands of Elliot Monroe. The marketing department, nestled on the 39th floor, looked nothing like the utilitarian halls of operations or finance. It was designed like a curated gallery, glass whiteboards covered in pastel brainstorming notes, exposed, brick walls hung with abstract art, diffused pendant lights dangling over soft lounge chairs and high-concept standing desks. It was a space that screamed creative authority, a shrine to inspiration and innovation. Class. And at the center of it sat Elliot Monroe. Elliot was 41, lean and meticulously kept, with salt and pepper hair parted deliberately to one side, styled to look both casual and curated. He wore dark turtlenecks beneath tailored blazers, sharp slacks rolled just enough at the ankle to show off limited edition sneakers. His glasses, thin silver frames resting precisely along the bridge of his nose, were less for vision and more for aesthetic. He walked with the confidence of a man who believed himself misunderstood genius and who used that illusion to mask his love for control. Amani entered his office suite at 10:30 p.m., right on schedule, she noted. Immediately how clean everything looked, surface level pristine, even by executive standards. But as her mop bucket settled beside the doorway and she moved to empty his trash bin, Elliot looked up from his monitor where slides of a product launch campaign danced in vivid motion. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Ah, good. You're here," he said, not turning away from the screen. "This space is a disaster." Amani blinked, glancing around. A few papers on the desk, a couple of used coffee, cups on the side table, one half, unwrapped protein bar on a napkin, barely enough for a 5-minute sweep. Still, she said nothing, nodded, and got to work. As she wiped down the coffee table, Elliot stood and began pacing, slowly around the office, hands clasped, behind his back like a professor grading an exam. He moved with exaggerated slowness, inspecting everything she touched. "That's not how you clean glass," he said, gesturing toward the surface she just finished. "Circular motions, always. Straight lines leave streaks." Amani adjusted her technique, resisting the urge to explain that she'd already cleaned the table 3 times. He continued, "And you're using the wrong cleaner. That one smells like ammonia. Makes the room feel institutional." His nose wrinkled. "Try the citrus blend next time." She continued silently, biting the inside of her cheek. When she turned to vacuum the rug, Elliot began picking up the corners of cushions, peering underneath as if he expected to find some forgotten relic. "Did you check under the couch?" she asked. "People spill crumbs." "There's nothing under there," Imani replied, before she could catch herself. His head snapped toward her, the pleasant tone gone. "Excuse me." She lowered her gaze. "I'll check again, sir," he said. Nothing, but the pause lingered like a slap. 20 minutes later, she finished. Everything gleamed, not a speck out of place. "I'm going to have to ask you to do it again," Elliot said already, walking back toward his desk. "There's still dust on the baseboards, and that scent is just off. I'd like the space to smell fresh, not like chemicals." He tapped his temple as if reminding her of some universally agreed-upon standard. Amani nodded again and started over. Wiped, sprayed, vacuumed, sanitized. The second inspection was worse. Time. "The windows," he said, gesturing toward panes. She hadn't even touched because they weren't part of the assigned checklist. "They're foggy. I can see smudges when the light hits them at that angle." He pointed, without looking her in the eye. "Redo them." As she climbed the step stool to reach the top edges of the frame, she noticed him casually brushing a few paper clips off the corner of the desk. With his hand, they bounced onto the carpet with metallic pings. Moments later, he pointed at the floor. "You missed a spot." The pattern repeated for almost 2 hours. The third round, she anticipated his critiques, polishing every surface with obsessive attention. When she finally announced she was finished again, Elliot walked the perimeter like a general inspecting troops. He made a soft humming noise, non-committal. "Better," he said, and then added, "but next time, try to be more detail-oriented from the start. Saves everyone time, everyone, as if he had broken a sweat." It was well past midnight when she finally left his office. Her hands were raw, her legs ached. Her mind, however, had never been sharper. Louise had been right. There were many kinds of cruelty at Sterling Horizon. Collins was brutish and loud, but Elliot's, it was dressed in civility. It wore glasses and smiled while it stripped people of their time and dignity. His version of abuse wasn't about yelling. It was about eraser through manipulation. Death by 1,000. Redo it better. And perhaps, most chilling, he did it not out of hatred, but out of habit. As Imani wheeled her cart down the hallway, she pulled out the tiny voice recorder hidden in her front pocket. It had captured every word, every command, every sigh of feigned disappointment. She pressed stop, because Elliot Monroe didn't just give her a reason to collect evidence. He gave her a masterclass in performative professionalism, in weaponized feedback masked as mentoring, and she would make sure the board heard every second of it. It was Thursday afternoon, and the city outside was glowing under the soft haze of winter, light, casting long golden streaks across the mirrored facade of Sterling Horizon Tower. Inside, however, the air felt colder, sterile, too clean, too composed. Imani had traded her cleaning uniform for a plain grey sweater and jeans that afternoon, blending in as just another lower-level employee with a badge. Her shift wouldn't start until 10:00 p.m. But today she had come early, not to clean, but to test something more delicate than chemicals on glass. Moral core. The integrity of the company's moral core. The human resources suite on the 21st floor was as welcoming as a Pinterest board. Pastel couches, plants in minimalist ceramic pots, soft jazz floating from hidden speakers, and a wall lined with motivational posters. Your voice matters. We're here to listen. People first always. Lingered on one in particular open door, open heart, which hung above the frosted glass door of Natalie Evans Sterling, Horizon's Vice President of Human Resources. Natalie was in her mid-40s, white with perfectly straight, shoulder-length blonde hair, reading, glasses perched on the edge of her nose, and a voice that always seemed to hover in that careful tone reserved for yoga instructors and professional empaths. She was known throughout the company as the approachable one, the safe space, the sounding board. Her emails always ended in smiley faces or heart emojis. Her LinkedIn bio listed empathy, equity, empowerment as guiding values. When Imani knocked softly, Natalie looked up and smiled warmly. "Come in, sweetheart. You must be new. I don't think we've met. Have a seat." Imani obeyed, clutching a mug of tea Natalie offered her, not because she needed it, but because she had learned that accepting hospitality was part of the choreography and of seeming grateful of being heard. "I'm Nia." She began slipping into the identity she had perfected over the last week. "Nia Walker. I'm with the cleaning crew. I wanted to talk to someone about something that happened a few nights ago." Natalie leaned forward, hands folded, eyes radiating warmth. "I'm so glad you came to me. That's what I'm here for." Imani exhaled, then told the story as evenly as she could. She described the hallway, the mop bucket, Colin Graves, the cup of water, the drenching, the footprints. She left out who she really was, but told the rest of the truth plainly, without embellishment. When she finished, Natalie nodded, slowly, lips pursed in a sympathetic half-frown. "That sounds unpleasant." Really unpleasant. Amani blinked. Unpleasant. Natalie reached across the desk, gently patting Imani's wrist. I just want to start by saying, I believe you and I appreciate your courage in sharing this with me. Imani waited, sensing the but already forming like fog before a storm. That said, Natalie, continued, her voice lowering into something almost motherly, it's important to remember that different departments have different communication styles. Colin's role involves a lot of pressure. He's detail-oriented, intense. That doesn't always translate well. Imani sat straighter. Pouring water on someone isn't a communication style. Natalie's smile faltered, then reset. Of course not. No one's condoning that. But I do think, based on what you've told me, this might be a misunderstanding rather than misconduct. Sometimes, in these high-performance environments, things can be taken personally when they weren't meant that way. There it was, the soft dismissal, the rebranding of harm into something palatable, a misunderstanding. Amani stayed calm. So, you won't file a report? Natalie sighed, leaned back in her chair, and gave her a look that blended condescension with care. We're very careful about formal reports, especially when there's no pattern. You're new here, correct? Imani nodded, slowly. Natalie tapped a pen lightly against her desk. Then my advice? Focus on your work. Show your commitment. People will take notice. If Colin sees that you're trying, he might ease up. He pushes because he expects excellence. The implication was clear. If you're treated badly, it's because you haven't proven you deserve better. Amani bit the inside of her cheek. I thought your office was a safe space. Natalie smiled. Again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. It is. But safety also means realistic expectations. Not everyone will adapt to you, Nia. Sometimes we adapt to them. Imani stood slowly, setting the untouched tea down. Thank you for your time. Natalie nodded, approvingly. I'm always here if you need to talk. But she wasn't. Not really. Not for people like Nia Walker. Not for the janitors. Not for the invisible. The poster on the door mocked her on the way out. Its promise of an open heart, as empty as the words that had just tried to dress up abuse in corporate silk. What Natalie didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the phone in Amani's pocket had recorded the entire conversation. Every soothing deflection, every gentle eraser, every we take these things seriously, followed by a maybe, don't take it personally. Back in the elevator, descending once again toward the basement level, where she would change into her uniform. Imani's reflection in the mirrored panel looked calm, but something inside her had shifted. The water Colin poured on her had soaked her to the bone. Elliot's mind games had exhausted her, but Natalie's smile had almost broken her, because it was the kind of evil that came disguised as protection. It was the moment Imani Carter truly understood the enemy wasn't just individuals. It was the system that protected them, the web of civility that turned screams into whispers and pain into policy. And if she wanted real change, she would have to tear that web apart, one thread at a time. The 38th floor of Sterling Horizon was always colder than the rest of the building. Not because of the air conditioning, though it did hum a little louder here, but because of what the floor represented. This was the realm of Bianca Sterling, the company's revered and feared senior vice president of global sales. The glass walls were thicker here, the conference tables larger, the chairs more angular, and the silence oppressive. Meetings on this floor weren't discussions. They were declarations, carefully staged, performances where no one dared interrupt Bianca's momentum. It was just before 9:00 p.m., and Amani had reviewed the cleaning schedule 3 times. The Regency Room, the flagship conference, suite on this floor, was booked for deep cleaning every second Thursday of the month. That night was that night. The janitorial calendar had been cross-checked with corporate scheduling. No meetings were posted, no conflicts noted. She was already halfway into wiping down the built-in counters when she heard it. The distinct click of designer heels against hardwood, sharp and evenly timed, like the tick of an expensive timepiece. The door flung open with a force that startled her, and there she was. Bianca Sterling, 46, walked like someone who had never been told no. Her skin was light bronze makeup, immaculately, blended lips perpetually curled in the suggestion of condescension. Her hair, a tight bouquet of bleached blonde curls, was pinned to one side with a gold clip shaped like a dagger. Her blazer was crimson, her nails black. Her voice, when it emerged, was the kind that didn't rise. It descended cool and final. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Imani froze, holding a rag in one hand and a disinfectant bottle in the other. "Cleaning, ma'am. This room is scheduled for maintenance tonight, 9:00 p.m. to 11. Bianca blinked once, then stepped fully into the room, eyes narrowing as if just now, processing who she was speaking to and who approved, that she asked, tone drenched in offense, as if the room itself had betrayed her. Imani hesitated. "It's on the schedule, building operations." "Well, reschedule it," Bianca snapped, tossing her handbag onto a chair. "I have a private negotiation call with Singapore in 5 minutes, and I will not have someone pushing a mop behind me while I'm closing a 7-figure deal. I'm sorry," Imani said calmly, holding her ground. "I can step out for now and return once you're finished, but I'll need to mark the space incomplete unless I can finish by end of shift." Bianca turned toward her, fully incredulous. "Are you threatening to mark a flagship boardroom incomplete because you want to wipe tables?" "I'm just following protocol," Imani replied evenly. "If there's a conflict, it has to go through facilities." The words hadn't even finished leaving her mouth when Bianca took a step forward. Her heels made the contact feel ceremonial. Her eyes burned. Her hand moved before thought could catch it. And then crack. The slap came without warning, without build-up, without hesitation. It wasn't the kind of slap meant to hurt. It was the kind meant to shame. It landed squarely on Imani's right cheek, the force snapping her face sideways, sending the cleaning cloth flying from her hand. The silence that followed was dense. Time didn't freeze. It congealed. Even Bianca looked, surprised at herself for half a second, but just as quickly, her eyes hardened again, as if justifying her actions in real time. "Don't you ever talk back to me again," she hissed, her voice low and lethal. "You are nothing here. Do you understand that nothing? Get out of my sight before I have you removed." Imani didn't move at first. The sting across her face pulsed with heat, but the deeper pain was beneath it, a fury that curled low and sharp like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. She stood, upright, slowly, her breath, even her eyes, never breaking contact. For a moment, the urge to rip away the veil to tell this woman who she really was surged so violently through her that she tasted it in her mouth. The words itch to be released. "I am Imani Carter and I could end your career with a phone call." But she didn't say it. Not yet. Because This wasn't about ego. This wasn't about revenge. This was about proof. So she bent down, picked up the rag in silence, and with the precision of someone performing a sacred task, placed it neatly back in her cart. "I'll return when the room is clear," she said quietly, and turned to leave. She passed by 3 junior sales associates, standing frozen just beyond the glass wall. They had seen everything: the slap, the words, the humiliation, and they looked away, quickly, ashamed, not of what had happened, but of the fact that they hadn't stopped it. In that moment, Imani understood something new. Colin's cruelty had been petty, Elliot's manipulation methodical, Natalie's indifference veiled in compassion, but Bianca's assault, it was the company's mask ripped clean off. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no room for spin. It was abuse raw, undisguised, and delivered at the altar of corporate dominance. Later that night, alone in the break room, Imani stared at her reflection in the vending machine's glass. The red mark was fading now, but the fire behind her eyes had only grown. She reached into her locker, retrieved a hidden backup phone, and began uploading video footage from the button camera, stitched beneath the front flap of her janitor's badge. It had caught the entire incident, from Bianca's entrance to the slap and everything that followed. The audio was crisp, the visuals clear, and the next time Bianca Sterling raised a hand, it wouldn't be in power, it would be in defense, because Imani Carter wasn't collecting sympathy. She was collecting evidence, and the countdown to exposure had just begun. The slap had left more than a mark on Imani's cheek. It had detonated something within her, not rage, not even humiliation. What had ignited was clarity, a laser-cut realization that what she'd been enduring wasn't a series of isolated injustices. It was a coordinated rot, a quiet epidemic of cruelty nested inside Sterling Horizon's most lauded departments. And if she had once come here to observe, she now moved with the precision of a prosecutor, gathering ammunition for the reckoning that would change everything. She started that very night in the janitorial supply room on B2, tucked behind the industrial dryer and beneath a false floor tile. She stashed the first of several items smuggled in through deliveries and errands: a set of pinhole cameras with motion sensors, a compact audio recorder the size of a pack of gum, and a digital tablet linked to a private cloud. None of it traced to her name. The items were purchased in cash, mailed under aliases picked up from lockers that required no ID. If she was going to bring down the people, poisoning her father's legacy, she needed proof so airtight it couldn't be spun. Her first target was Colin Graves. She reviewed footage from the previous nights, moments when Colin had wandered, the halls long after his shift, speaking on the phone near stairwells, leaning into side offices to mutter instructions to others on his team. He wasn't just abusive, he was covering something. Imani installed a camera inside the ventilation panel of the East Wing break room, Colin's unofficial post-shift office where he often met with mid-tier supervisors. It took 3 nights, but eventually it caught what she was waiting for. On a grainy but clear recording, Colin could be seen sitting across from Darren Klein, the assistant controller from accounting. The conversation started casually: complaints about new hires not knowing their place, jokes about cleaners with attitude, problems, but then shifted. "So, the numbers?" Colin asked, keeping his voice low but audible. Darren leaned in. "We're still channeling the wellness budget through that dummy vendor. Payroll Hasn't flagged it. HR signs off every quarter and the perks for execs. They're getting their cut, Darren smirked. Wellness retreats or reimbursement, programs, all of it billed under mental health services, Colin chuckled. Benjamin has no idea, does he? No, Darren replied. But the board's starting to worry about his health. We keep nudging them, questioning his clarity. Leadership. They'll come around. One push, and he steps down. Imani froze. The footage, her blood chilled. But her mind, crystal clear. This wasn't just about mistreating employees. It was embezzlement, manipulation, and a quiet coup. Her next surveillance target was Elliot Monroe. He was more careful, always alone in his office, rarely speaking above a whisper, but he was also theatrical, prone to late-night monologues when he believed no one was listening. Imani placed a directional microphone in the central HVAC vent, connected to a recorder inside the custodian cart's utility compartment. It captured hours of Elliot murmuring to himself while reviewing files on his laptop. One night, she caught him, rehearsing a pitch to the board. Not a client. We need to be thinking post, Benjamin. His time is done. People want vision, not sentiment. Not the founder's daughter running things like a charity case. I've got the numbers, the momentum, the support. Graves is on board. Bianca's good once she gets her shares. There it was, clear as corporate ambition ever came. They weren't just covering each other's behavior. They were building a case to erase the man who built the company and anyone who stood in their way, including his successor, would be neutralized next. Imani's hands didn't tremble as she clipped the recordings, saved the files to multiple encrypted folders, and stored hard copies off-site. She printed documents too, timesheets with altered line items, vendor invoices signed by, ghost names, reimbursement slips for, luxury trips marked Team Resilience, workshop. She even retrieved email chains from a neglected printer tray on the 31st floor where Bianca had once left confidential strategy sheets during a late-night rush. Each piece of evidence painted the same picture, a silent triangle of power coordinated between Colin, Bianca, and Elliot. Each had a role. Colin kept the staff in, checked through fear. Elliot managed perception and narrative. Bianca wielded financial influence and intimidation to keep the board distracted. Together, they had been siphoning money, grooming allies, and pushing a narrative that Benjamin Carter, her father, was no longer fit to lead. What they hadn't accounted for was the cleaner walking among them. Imani moved like a ghost through the building. Those final nights, not as prey, but as predator. She gathered whispers, photographs, login-ins left carelessly typed into unlocked screens. She posed questions to interns under the guise of casual hallway chats. She found security logs that contradicted Colin's official stories, and in the dead hours between 2 a.m. and sunrise, she sat alone in an unused janitor's closet, piecing it all together like a detective, assembling the timeline to her own betrayal. But through it all, she stayed in character, never flinching, never letting her gaze linger too long. To the world, she was still Nia Walker, the tired cleaning lady, unimportant, forgettable, replaceable. What they didn't know was that she was also Imani Carter, the future CEO. And when she came for them, it wouldn't be through HR reports or quiet retirements. It would be in a boardroom with evidence projected on walls and reputations torn apart in front of the very shareholders they sought to deceive. The story had shifted. She was no longer the observer, no longer the target. She was the storm, and her vengeance would not come in whispers. It would come with receipts. The 42nd floor boardroom at Sterling Horizon was a sanctuary of power, wrapped in glass and walnut with a sweeping view of Lake Michigan behind it. The space was designed for decisions that moved markets and silenced dissent. That Monday morning, sunlight knifed through the room like a spotlight from heaven, glinting off the polished surface of the 10-foot table, where a dozen of the company's most influential minds now sat, nervous, curious, unaware of what was about to unfold. Imani stood just outside the boardroom doors, dressed once again in her grey cleaner uniform, her fingers rougher than they'd been 3 weeks ago, clenched tightly around the handle of her supply cart. Inside her chest, her heart beat a steady war drum rhythm, not from fear, but from purpose. This was it. Every step, every humiliation, every piece of footage had led here. And now, the reckoning wasn't coming. It had arrived. Inside the room, Benjamin Carter, founder and CEO Emeritus, stood at the head of the table, his posture a mix of gravity and restraint. His silver hair was combed back with meticulous care, his voice steady as he addressed the gathered board and senior executives. "Thank you all for coming on short notice." He began scanning the room with the kind of weighty eye contact only decades of leadership could deliver. "I called this emergency session to address what I believe are systemic breaches of our company's values and the legacy we claim to uphold." Among those seated, Colin Graves, stiff in his chair, arms folded, eyes narrowed. Elliot Monroe, tapping a pen against his notebook posture, relaxed in the way only liars practice. Bianca Sterling, dressed in ivory silk legs, crossed elegantly, an unreadable look behind her tinted glasses. Natalie Evans from HR, unusually pale, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and scattered throughout the room, board members with titles like CFO, COO, legal counsel, many of whom looked confused, expectant, mildly annoyed by the unscheduled disruption. Just as Benjamin opened his mouth to speak again, the door clicked open behind him. Imani entered, pushing her cart. Heads turned, eyebrows rose. "What?" is Colin started, but Benjamin raised a hand. "She's here at my request." There was a beat of silence. No one argued, though confusion rippled visibly across the room. Imani walked slowly, deliberately to the front of the boardroom. She parked the cart beside the projector console. Her voice was calm, clear. "Before we begin, I'd like to request a few minutes to speak. I won't take long." A few board members exchanged glances. Colin scoffed under his breath. Bianca smirked. Elliot leaned back with a lazy sort of curiosity, but no one stopped her. Imani looked up, not at the board, but straight at the three people who had made her life hell. Her eyes were steady. Then, without a word, she reached up and removed the headscarf. Her curls, carefully restored, cascaded around her shoulders. Next, she took off the thick-rimmed janitor glasses, revealing her sharp, commanding gaze. Finally, she reached for the zipper of her uniform, pulled it down in one swift motion, and stepped out to reveal a tailored navy blazer and ivory blouse underneath. She looked every inch the executive she had once been. Gasps rippled around the room. "I'm Imani Carter," she said evenly. "Vice President of Innovation, daughter of Benjamin Carter. And for the past 3 weeks, I've been working undercover on this floor, not as a leader, but as a cleaner." The silence was instant, dense, terrifying. "Why?" Elliot asked, finally, voice tight. "Because I needed to know what kind of company my father built and what it's become under your leadership, she replied, eyes locking onto him. She turned to the projector, inserted a flash drive, and clicked a remote. The screen behind her flickered to life. The first video played Colin Graves pouring water over her head, captured from a security cam just outside the east hallway. His voice echoed across the room. Now you've got something real to clean. Colin polled that's taken out of context. Next slide. Imani said it showed Elliot, Monroe instructing her to recan the same, surface 3 times, casually brushing paper clips onto the floor, muttering to himself about her being barely functional. Next, she continued, Bianca. Sterling full slap captured from a multi-angle lens stitched into her ID badge. Bianca's voice played loud and crisp. Don't you ever talk back to me. You are nothing here. Bianca stood abruptly. This is an ambush. That was a provocation. She was next. Imani cut her off. A series of emails appeared, projected for all to see. Invoices, reimbursement requests, ghost vendors, all linked to a shell company that had received over $400. 0 Inches Wellness. Funding. Over 18 months, money siphoned from employee benefits and rerouted into executive bonuses. Gasps turned into murmurs. One board member covered his mouth. Another reached for his phone. Imani continued, her voice like steel, wrapped in silk. For 3 weeks, I endured humiliation, racism, physical assault, and psychological degradation. But that's not what scares me. What scares me is that this isn't shocking to most of you. You've seen pieces of this. You've ignored it. You've excused it. And that stops today. Benjamin rose, beside her now, voice low and unshakable. This company was founded on principles of innovation, integrity, and inclusion. Those are not branding slogans. They're values. And the people sitting in this room, some of them have betrayed those values. Security personnel entered the room quietly. 2 men in suits and earpieces. Benjamin nodded toward them. Mr. Graves, Miss Sterling, Mr. Monroe, your access badges are being deactivated. You will be escorted out after this meeting. Your contracts are terminated effective immediately. Miss Evans, you are on administrative leave, pending internal review. Colin stood, furious. You can't do this. I've been here 25 years. You used those years to build fear, not trust, Benjamin replied coldly. Elliot laughed bitterly. You think this will stick? You think a few videos and tears will bring down seasoned executives? No, Imani said softly. But the SEC will. Gasps again. She turned to the board. I've already submitted the full audit trail, time-stamped footage, internal communications, and whistleblower affidavit to our legal department, external counsel, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. What happens next is bigger than this room. As security began escorting the stunned executives out, the rest of the room remained stunned. A long moment passed before one board member, an older woman in a navy pantsuit, stood up and extended her hand to Imani. You've done more in 3 weeks than some do in 3 years, she said simply. Imani took the hand, her own trembling just slightly now, not from nerves, but from release. Justice had not been handed to her. She had earned it. Every second, every bruise, every night of silence and control. She had bent under the system just long enough to understand how to break it, and now, finally, she was free. 3 weeks after the boardroom eruption, the Sterling Horizon Tower shimmered with a different kind of energy. It wasn't just the changing light of spring spilling across the glass panels, or the newly renovated lobbies that now displayed, banners celebrating equity, excellence, and integrity. It was something deeper, more subtle, like the weight of the building had shifted, redistributing from top to bottom, as though gravity had finally remembered where real work began. The company had survived its reckoning. Now it would rebuild. On a Friday morning filled with soft music and the scent of fresh tulips lining the executive floor, the main auditorium was packed. Executives in press suits, analysts in open collars, interns still clutching coffee, and at the front, a modest podium wrapped in sunlight. A giant screen displayed a simple message: a new chapter begins. Benjamin Carter stood in front of it wearing a charcoal grey suit in a quiet, reflective expression. His hair, whiter than before, framed a face lined not just with age, but with peace. For the first time in years, he seemed lighter, not because he had lost anything, but because he had let go. 34 years ago, he began his voice, calm, warm. I stood in a warehouse with a second-hand desk, 2 phones, and a dream bigger than my bank account. I built this company to be a home for vision, not just profits, and I told myself I would step down when the next leader proved they could protect that vision, not just expand it. He looked out at the crowd and his eyes lingered briefly on the front row where Imani sat, posture upright, the expression steady, dressed not to impress, but to lead. Behind her stood several familiar faces. Louise Jackson, hands clasped in the front of her floral dress. Darnell, the night shift floor supervisor, in a new collared shirt, and 5 other janitorial staff, each one standing, taller than they had in years. Well, Benjamin continued, I found that leader, and she didn't prove it in meetings or media. She proved it in silence, in suffering, in action. Imani Carter is no longer my daughter in the halls of this company. She is my successor, and I trust her with this company's future more than I trust anyone with my name. He stepped back. The room stood. The applause wasn't just loud, it was genuine. There was no politicking in the clapping, no performative nods. There was respect. Imani rose slowly. The podium seemed to grow smaller as she walked toward it. Not because it shrank, but because she had grown. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. Thank you, she said, simply letting the crowd quiet. I'm not going to talk about market, strategy, or quarterly earnings today. I'll save that for Monday. Today, I want to talk about something else. Dignity. She paused. The room listened. 3 weeks ago, I walked these halls, wearing a different uniform. I was pushed aside, ignored, humiliated, and I watched people, good people, work thankless hours while others reaped the reward of their silence. I also saw the strength, the grace, and the unshakable integrity of our frontline workers. They are not invisible anymore. They never should have been. She turned, slightly facing the custodial crew on stage. Louise, Darnell, every member of the night crew, today, you are not standing behind the podium. You are standing beside it, because you belong here. The room erupted again. Louise covered her mouth. Darnell's eyes glistened. Imani raised her hand gently, calling the room back to stillness. From this day forward, she continued, Sterling Horizon will tie executive bonuses to anonymous employee, feedback regardless of department. All frontline workers will be invited to quarterly town halls with guaranteed, protected speech. Cleaning and maintenance staff will receive full healthcare benefits, professional development support, and a rotating spotlight on our internal newsletter. Another wave of applause. But this isn't charity, she said, voice firm. Now, this is justice because respect is not something you earn by climbing a ladder. It's something you owe to every rung. She glanced out over the crowd where board members who had once doubted her now sat silently listening. Truly listening. The culture of a company doesn't live in its mission statement. It lives in its kitchens, its elevators, its break rooms at midnight. And from now on, our culture will reflect not just who we are, but who we choose to be. She stepped back. The applause didn't erupt this time. It rose like a swell, slow and powerful, a standing ovation, not just for a new CEO, but for a new era. That night, after the celebrations faded and the lights dimmed, Imani stood alone in the 45, the floor hallway, the same place where Colin had poured water on her, where her dignity had once pulled at her feet. Now, the floor gleamed under her heels. The cart was gone. In its place stood a brass plaque, newly mounted on the wall. This corridor is dedicated to those who keep Sterling Horizon standing, often unseen but never unworthy. She touched the plaque lightly, then turned toward her new office, not the one her father built, the one she would now shape. Because leadership, she had learned, doesn't begin at the top. It begins when you're willing to stand at the bottom and lift others with you. Weeks passed, but the tremors of Imani Carter's rise had not faded. They had only deepened, settling into the foundation of a dune company finally learning how to stand with weight balanced at every level. Sterling Horizon, once a fortress of filtered access and hushed hallways, had begun to breathe differently. Walls that used to separate departments were now glass by design and intention. Employees, who once passed each other like ghosts in the elevator, now spoke, even smiled. The change didn't come from a sweeping memo or an over-designed rebrand. It came from witnessing, from knowing someone at the top had walked through the fire of the bottom and brought the truth back. With her, Imani's first months as CEO were not marked by press conferences or media tours. Instead, she spent them in the shadows she used to clean. She sat through night shifts unannounced. She listened to junior staff pitch ideas directly. She reinstated former employees who had been unfairly pushed out. She brought Louise Jackson into a newly created role, Director of Culture, Integrity, tasked with monitoring workplace behavior across every shift, and department, reporting only to Imani, directly. Louise had declined twice, before accepting her modesty as real as her backbone. "You want me to be your eyes and ears?" she'd said, arms folded, skeptically in the break room that once doubled as her sanctuary. "I've been those for people for years. You're just giving me a title now." "No," Imani had replied with quiet reverence. "I'm giving you the authority that should have always come with that responsibility." Other transformations followed. Darnell was made head of facilities training. Natalie Evans's HR department was gutted and restructured with new staff, hired through blind audits and cultural fit, interviews conducted by mixed rank panels. Bianca's private suite had been turned into a wellness lounge, accessible to janitorial maintenance and tech support workers. Her nameplate now rested in a drawer gathering dust. But beneath the visible changes was something more profound, a shift in perception. People began to understand that power didn't only wear a blazer and a title. Sometimes it wore gloves, sometimes it pushed a cart. One evening, Imani found herself alone in her new office. The same office her father had once held the same view of Lake Michigan, stretching like a mirror to the horizon. The lights were dim. Her heels were off, her hair loose. On her desk lay a letter, handwritten, folded, with care. It was from her father. Imani leadership is not about holding power. It's about honoring the weight of it. I built this place, hoping someone like you would one day carry it further than I could. You did more than that. You returned it to its soul. I'm proud of what I built, but I'm prouder of how you rebuilt it, Dad. She closed the letter slowly, her eyes wet, but not broken because she wasn't broken. She was forged. The next morning at the quarterly all-hands meeting, Imani stood on stage beneath a banner that simply read one company, every voice. She didn't give a speech. Instead, she asked for silence. And then from the back of the room, the cleaning crew walked in. Louise, Darnell, Marcus, Josie, Dev, Fatima, each holding one of the company's quarterly excellence trophies. One by one, they placed them at the front, not for decoration, but for declaration. A promise that recognition would no longer be reserved for the most visible, the most loud, or the most polished. When the room stood to clap, it wasn't polite. It was personal. And as Imani stepped down from the stage, she didn't walk ahead of them. She walked with them, because the journey from cleaner to CEO wasn't just her story. It was the beginning of everyone else's. The story of Imani Carter is more than just a tale of corporate betrayal and justice. It is a powerful reminder that real leadership begins not in titles or offices, but in empathy, resilience, and the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when the world chooses to look away. Her journey from being humiliated, ignored, and underestimated as a night shift janitor to rising as the CEO, who redefined the company's culture, reminds us all that the most enduring power isn't control over others, but the courage to transform injustice into action, pain into purpose, in silence into systemic change. Imani's story reveals the truth many choose to forget. That true strength lies not in dominating others, but in standing firm with dignity when no one is watching. That change doesn't come from a single heroic moment, but from countless silent battles fought with integrity. And most importantly, that the people who are so often unseen may be the ones who hold the company, the community, the whole system together. And now we want to hear from you. If you were in Imani's shoes, how far would you go to protect what your family built? Would you have the strength to endure the humiliation, to keep your cover, to fight from within for something bigger than yourself? Would you dare to walk through fire just to rebuild a legacy worth believing in? If this story touched you, if it made you reflect or reminded you of someone who's fought quietly and powerfully in their own way, drop a comment below. Share your thoughts. Your voice matters. And if you believe like we do that, stories like Imani's deserve to be told, remembered, and passed on, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to bring more stories that uplift, challenge, and inspire. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the quietest fighters often carry the loudest truth. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.